Hey everyone, this is Nick with Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason. Today we're going to dive into FinOps and best practices. This will be a rolling series of episodes where we're going to break down some of the best practices as we've experienced them and the lessons we've learned, whether through the organizations we've managed in the past or in working with our customers and the sorts of challenges that they've faced as they've gone on the journey of cloud optimization, managing their spending, building a CCOE, building a FinOps practice, et cetera. So, Jason, I think we want to start at the beginning here. And while some of the listeners maybe already past this part of the journey, I think it's a really important part of the journey, and it's something you constantly come back to, and that is, accountability and this early need to get, allocation and understanding of who owns what in the environment right very early on. So tell us a little bit in your words, what does it mean to create accountability, to think about allocation in the context of cloud spending?
Well, I think there's three key areas to get you started down the path of accountability. That would be identifying who owns what, right? I mean, it's hard to hold a team or a person or a business, whatever it is, if you don't know who should be owning it. And then, it's about allocating the entire environment, right? Once you identify those groups of ownership, whatever that makes sense, who owns what, it's about allocating the entire environment, and not, allocating only makes sense if it's in business context, right? Or the user's context, if it's a specific person deploying infrastructure in an environment. So allocating the entire environment, as well as making sure that how you allocate it is business contextual. So ownership, allocate, and business context.
Perfect. So let's dive into I think a first one, or a good one to define. We say the word allocation. Most listeners probably know what that means, but for those who are the uninitiated, what does it mean? What's the action? What are we doing when we say we need to allocate out the environment? What are we doing there?
We are taking every resource that we have and need being the most important, right? Let's get rid of the stuff we don't need first. And we are assigning it to contextual groups within the organization, groupings within the organization. They can take many forms: business unit, customer, engineer deploying infrastructure. It's whatever's contextual to it could be just environment, dev, and prod. I mean, it could be a small, where that makes more sense to you, but. Understand this is why ownership is key first, because ownership tells you who you need to talk to about what's most important, right? And then make sure that you have it allocated in the way that makes sense to those users.
Yeah, and I think, those with the financial background understand allocation sort of immediately, that, we allocate every cost in the business to a business unit. And sometimes, and certainly in the past, it has been the case that technology is often just allocated to a broad category of IT. It's a cost center. And in the cloud world and variable spending, we have this opportunity now to actually align those costs more accurately in the way they should be, honestly, with the business and with the revenue. So, this act of using metadata in the technical resource to identify where that cost should go and how it should be aligned inside of the organization is extremely powerful. And it's really, it is, in my opinion, the first thing you have to get right when you embark on the FinOps journey.
I agree. It's definitely one of the things without the visibility and the contextual and with the application of the contextual way in which a business wants to look at this data, it's all mumbo jumbo, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Who cares how much I'm paying for EC2 as an organization? I want to know, as an example, I want to know how much of that EC2 is my prod environment versus my dev environment. And if EC2 is 70% in my dev environment, I probably have something wrong, right? I mean, so I think it is critically important to identify who those people or business units are, and then making sure that the correct pieces or resources in the environment get allocated to those business units or people.
Absolutely. And I think it allows then the technology organization to hold the business accountable to what they're consuming, which has not historically been the case. That's always been very hard to do. So let's, what are some of the direct things that organizations or practitioners should think about when allocating their environment? What are the sorts of do this, don't do that?
Well, shared costs are always a hang up. We
so don't get hung up on them.
Yeah, so don't get hung up on them. We typically say just start with tagging them as shared. I mean, that's the first, get a bucket of all your shared costs. Don't worry about sharing those costs out to those units, right? Just be able to say, this is all of my infrastructure or resources that are shared. So just tagging them shared is probably the first way to get to get out of the hang up that shared costs often lead to. Then the next thing is, we always try to talk about picking out a group of infrastructure or resources that is, easy to tackle first. And an example of this would be, you have a dev environment, most likely, most everybody does, right? Or a sandbox environment. Let's take everything that's in our dev environment and tag it as such, making sure that we can at least allocate everything that's in our dev environment, understanding what's there. And it doesn't have to be the dev environment. It could be sandbox. It could be, a specific small application. The point being, start with something that you can attain easily and start to show those benefits and start to show the visibility around it. Take the things that you learn from allocating that, making sure that you're doing it correctly with the rest of the environment. Those are two things that we often talk
agree.
about.
I think if I were to add on to that, two more things. Don't get hung up on trying to build a perfect strategy around allocation initially. The as much as I hate it, is a really good analogy. Crawl, walk, run.
I know.
Start with something easy, like I'm going to get the environment, metadata tagged in my across my entire infrastructure. And so I know where my dev is, I know where my prod is, et cetera, my test environment, my staging, my sandbox, whatever your environments are, however you want to break those up. It's an easy thing to kind of think about and go tackle. And you can progress from there, right? You can get more and more nuanced. You can understand the sorts of metadata you're going to want to use in the environment in order to automate some of the tasks as we get further into best practices. And two is, if you don't know where to allocate something, tag it as such. Just put a tag on it that's other or unallocated or uncategorized or whatever. The important part there is you've made a deliberate decision that you need to come back and address those. And that's better than leaving it untagged, because there's going to be other resources are going to show up in the environment not tagged. And you want to not be lost in the noise of all the untagged stuff, trying to find the newly untagged stuff, right? So when you find something,
Correct.
You don't know where it needs to go, tag it as such and move on. Keep moving. The point is, don't get hung up here.
Correct.
Cool. Let's talk about number 2, which we could go with either of these first, but I think let's start with ownership, assigning ownership, determining who owns resources. What's important for organizations to think about here? Clear ownership.
Well, I think this is obviously very contextual to the business, but identifying who the key decision makers are is obviously a very important step in this process. Not only to understand how to allocate out the environment, right, by business, by whatever's contextual there, but also to make sure that that's the person that's the individual or grouping of individuals that's going to help you hold the team accountable, right, or whoever's team it is. So identify who the business decision makers are. Some just high level examples, which we've talked about could be business unit, could be just the CIO, could be the CTO, right? I mean, it could be individual people. But the most important thing is to understand who those decision makers are and to make sure that whatever information that we're providing back to the business around allocation is going to be information that those people want to see.
Yeah, I mean, very, very simply, and again, you don't want to get overly hung up on this. To start with, just understanding who owns the P&L. They probably have VP in front of their title. Maybe they have C in front of their title, but just who owns that P&L? That's a good place to start. It may be when you get into dev environments, it might be directors or managers or principals or architects that own some of those environments. That's okay. They may own the budget for those environments, but it's important to start with kind of the P&L. It's important to start with the P&L and break it down from there. Don't get overly nuanced yet. As the demands of the organization, as the adoption of FinOps happens, and you necessarily get driven to more and more nuanced decision making because the data is going to become really good and you're going to make data driven decisions, you can then break down those organizations even further and get more nuanced into who owns what inside of a particular maybe complicated app or in your dev environments, et cetera. All right. So number 3 is, aligning allocation with the business. And I think this is kind of tie these two pieces we just talked about together. And you end up with number 3 in thinking about, accountability best practices, aligning allocation to the business. What does this mean, Jason?
That means taking everything that we've learned from who owns what and what's important to the business and grouping the environment from a resource utilization or cost utilization perspective in those contextual units. Obviously the easy ones are my environment, prod or dev, right? That's an easy one, or whatever you call them, prod, non-prod. Different business units, obviously, or applications, workloads within, we see a lot of companies group them by major applications that service different various aspects of the business. But what's also important about aligning allocation with business context is the ability to show the engineers who are actually inflicting change in the environment what portion of the environment they control and how their decisions affect spending and utilization in the environment. So it's not just about business unit; it's about the person as well.
I think so.
Giving them the data they need.
I think so. And I think something important to think about, especially if you're in the engineering side of the house, the financial side of the house has probably already thought about this, but you want to think in the terms that your business thinks in. So if the business thinks in terms of business units, that's how you want to think. If they think in terms of divisions or subsidiaries or departments, those are the ways you also want to think about allocation, because those are various ways of dividing up cost centers and revenue inside of the business. Now, if you're unsure, what we're going to be talking about certainly in one of the next episodes is best practices around collaboration and building a team. You're going to want to make sure that you have representation from the financial side on the team, and they're already going to have thought about this stuff. They're going to have accounts for this sort of allocation because they want to align COGS to their lines of revenue. It's easy if you only have one line of revenue, but in scale environments, you're probably going to have many, many, many different business lines, different areas where there's the cost of goods sold is actually being aligned to the revenue that's coming in, and so you're gonna want to align with finance there. What you don't want to do is go and build an allocation strategy that is not actually aligned with your business. You go and you kind of dream it up yourself, and we're engineers, so we like to build complex machines. So you go and map this all yourself, and then you go to finance and you find out that there's a totally different strategy for how they do allocation or how they allocate expenses. Don't want to end up in that seat. You want to have collaborated early and gotten everyone on board.
Yep.
I think that covers off kind of
allocate your entire environment, right?
Yep.
Identify who owns what so that you can make sure that how you're allocating the environment is contextual to the business. I mean, those are the main 3 things.
Yes, Absolutely. All right. So tune in next time. We're going to keep on going through best practices. You're going to see them kind of inserted through the journey as we talk about FinOps and how FinOps can be implemented in your organization. We're always looking for your feedback. Head out to Reddit and to our subreddit /r/cloud cost optimization. If you have any questions, drop them there. We'll answer them on the show. And we're always looking for your feedback on what we're doing. Head up to tenacity.ai. Certainly, if you want to demo the platform, hit us up there. But you can also download our cloud cost optimization handbook. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.